Montana Territory, 1878. The setting sun cast long shadows across the rolling grasslands of Whitefish Valley, painting the sky in hues of amber and violet. Katherine Dawson stood on the rough-hewn porch of her father's newly constructed cabin, her sun-bronzed hands gripping the railing as she surveyed the land they had claimed 6 months prior. At 24 years old, she had already lived the equivalent of several lifetimes, each one marked by loss and hard-learned lessons that had shaped her into the woman she now was: resourceful, self-sufficient, and above all, guarded. The evening breeze caught her chestnut hair, which she had hastily tied back that morning with a simple leather cord. Unlike the women back east, Katherine had no time for elaborate hairstyles or fashionable dresses. Her faded blue work shirt and sturdy canvas trousers bore the stains of honest labor, fence mending, horse training, and the countless other tasks required to transform this wild slice of Montana into a proper cattle ranch. "Looks like rain coming," her father called from inside the cabin, his voice carrying the perpetual weariness that had settled into his bones after her mother's death 3 years ago. Katherine nodded, though he couldn't see her. "Yes. The cattle will need moving to the north pasture tomorrow." Her gaze drifted to the distant mountains, their peaks already obscured by gathering clouds. The frontier had taught Katherine one indisputable truth. Sentiment was a luxury she couldn't afford. Love was a distraction that got people killed in a land where survival demanded constant vigilance. She had watched her mother succumb to illness with no doctor for 50 miles. She had held her younger brother as he bled out from a hunting accident. Each loss had reinforced what she knew to be true: attachment only made the inevitable pain worse. Her father emerged from the cabin, his graying hair disheveled as he joined her on the porch. "Rider coming," he said, pointing toward the eastern trail. Katherine narrowed her eyes against the fading light, spotting the lone figure approaching on horseback. Visitors were rare in this remote stretch of territory, rare and often unwelcome. "Get the rifle," she said quietly, her body tensing with instinctive caution. Her father disappeared inside without argument. Out here, hesitation could be fatal. When he returned, he handed her the Winchester while keeping his shotgun for himself. They had learned the hard way that travelers could bring trouble, especially this close to the disputed border with the Blackfeet territory. As the rider drew closer, Katherine could make out more details: a young man, perhaps 26, sitting tall in his saddle atop a magnificent dun stallion. His clothes, though trail-worn, appeared of good quality. His dark hat was pulled low over his face, shadowing his features in the dying light. "Hello, the house," the stranger called out, stopping his horse at a respectful distance. "Permission to approach." Katherine kept the rifle visible but lowered. "State your business," she called back, her voice carrying the authority she had cultivated through necessity. The rider removed his hat, revealing a shock of sandy blonde hair and features that even Katherine, with her practiced indifference to such things, had to admit were striking. His face held a certain openness that seemed at odds with the hardness of frontier life, clear blue eyes that regarded them with neither fear nor aggression, just honest exhaustion. "Name's Kyle Daniels," he said, replacing his hat. "I'm looking for work and shelter if you're offering either. I can pay for my keep until then." Katherine's father stepped forward. "Thomas Dawson, this is my daughter, Katherine. We might have work depending on what you know about cattle." "Born and raised on a ranch in Colorado," Kyle replied. "Can rope, ride, and wrangle with the best of them. Good with horses, too." "We've got a barn with an empty stall for your horse," Thomas said after a moment's consideration. "You can sleep there tonight. We'll talk terms in the morning if you're still interested." Kyle nodded, gratitude evident in his posture. "That's more than fair, thank you, sir." As he dismounted, Katherine studied him more carefully. He moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to hard work, but there was something else about him, something in the way his gaze kept returning to the horizon, scanning restlessly, that suggested he might be running from something. "Or someone. Katherine will show you to the barn," her father said. "There's a pump out back for water." She shot her father a look of betrayal, but he had already turned back toward the cabin. With a resigned sigh, she gestured for Kyle to follow her. "Your horse looks tired," she commented as they walked, noting the animal's heaving flanks and the lather around its bit. "Been riding hard." "Been riding long," Kyle corrected. 3 days from Billings with only short rests. Had to make good time before the weather turned. Katherine led him around the main house toward the sturdy barn they had raised the previous autumn. "You're running from something," she stated bluntly. Kyle looked surprised, then offered a wry smile. "Not the law, if that's your concern." "Wouldn't be the first man to lie about that." "No, I suppose not." He fell silent as they entered the barn, the familiar smells of hay and horseflesh enveloping them. "But I'm not running from the law, just needed a change of scenery." Katherine pointed to an empty stall. "Your horse can go there, there's grain in the bin and I expect you to clean up after him." She turned to leave. "Miss Dawson," Kyle called after her. She paused, one hand on the barn door. "I appreciate the chance. I know strangers aren't always welcome out here." Katherine studied him in the lantern light she had hung, taking in details she had missed before: a thin scar that ran along his jaw, the calluses on his hands that spoke of years of ranch work, and most tellingly, the absence of a wedding ring. "We need help with the herd," she said finally. "If you can provide it, you're welcome to stay. If not, you'll be on your way by sundown tomorrow." She left him then, returning to the cabin where her father sat at their rough-hewn table, nursing a cup of coffee. "You shouldn't have invited him to stay," she said without preamble. "We know nothing about him." Thomas sighed. "We need the help, Kat. You know that as well as I do. With Johnson and his boy gone back east, we can't manage the spring calving alone. So we hire from town, from people we know. There's no one left in town looking for work. The mines have taken all the able-bodied men." He studied his daughter's face. "Besides, I saw how he handled that horse. He knows what he's doing." Katherine sat across from him, pouring herself a cup from the pot. "Fine. But he sleeps in the barn until we're sure he can be trusted." "Already decided that," Thomas said with a hint of amusement. "He seems a decent sort, though." "Decent sorts still rob and kill out here," Katherine replied. She thought of her mother's locket, the only valuable they kept hidden in the cabin. "I'll lock the strongbox tonight." Her father nodded, understanding her caution. After her mother and brother died, Katherine had built walls around herself as sturdy as those of their cabin. Thomas knew better than to challenge them directly. "Get some sleep," he advised. "Spring storm's coming, tomorrow will be a long day." Katherine retired to her small room, but sleep proved elusive. Through her window she could see the light still burning in the barn. The stranger, Kyle, was an unknown variable in their carefully ordered existence, and unknown variables were dangerous. She had learned to trust no one but herself and her father. The frontier was unforgiving of weakness, especially the weakness of caring too much. Every attachment was a potential wound, every connection a possible betrayal. Kyle Daniels would work for them if he proved capable, but he would remain a hired hand, nothing more. Katherine had sworn off the complication of deeper connections long ago. The wilderness had taught her that survival required solitude of spirit, if not of body. As the first droplets of rain began to patter against her window, she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, her dreams haunted by the image of clear blue eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed defenses. Morning arrived with the promised storm, rain lashing against the cabin in fierce gusts that bent the young saplings Katherine had planted along the path to breaking point. She dressed quickly in her sturdiest clothes, anticipating a day of fighting both weather and livestock. When she entered the main room, she was surprised to find Kyle already seated at their table, a steaming cup of coffee before him as he spoke quietly with her father. Both men looked up as she entered. "Morning," Kyle offered with a tentative smile. "Hope you don't mind. Your father invited me in when I came to report that your east fence line is down. Storm took out about 20 yards of it." Katherine glanced at her father, who shrugged. "We need to move the herd anyway. Might as well get started early." She poured herself coffee, noting with irritation that Kyle had apparently made the pot. "You didn't need to come inside for that," she said. "Katherine," her father admonished softly. Kyle seemed unperturbed. "It's all right, Mr. Dawson, I understand caution." He turned to Katherine. "I checked your horses too. The bay mare looks like she might be coming up lame. There's heat in her left front fetlock." Despite herself, Katherine was impressed by his initiative. Most hired hands needed explicit instruction, especially on their first day. "I'll look at her," she said, less curtly than before. "The cattle need moving to the north pasture. They'll have better shelter from the ravine walls there." "I noticed you have about 60 head," Kyle said. That's a lot for 2 people to manage. 3 now, Thomas pointed out, if you're staying. Kyle nodded, I'm staying. At least until you tell me otherwise. Something in his steady gaze made Katherine look away first. She busied herself gathering her rain slicker and hat from their pegs by the door. We should get moving before this gets worse, she announced. The creek rises fast after heavy rain. We don't want cattle stranded on the wrong side. The 3 of them headed out into the downpour, and Katherine was grudgingly impressed again when Kyle appeared with his own well-worn slicker and a coiled rope already slung across his saddle. He had clearly done this kind of work before. For the next several hours, they battled mud and reluctant cattle, guiding the herd across increasingly treacherous terrain toward the relative safety of the north pasture. Kyle proved his worth almost immediately, anticipating problems before they developed and working in wordless coordination with Katherine as though they had done this together for years. When a young heifer slipped down a muddy embankment toward the swollen creek, Kyle was off his horse in an instant, sliding down the slope to secure a rope around the panicked animal before it could be swept away. Katherine, watching from above, found herself holding her breath as he worked quickly but calmly, speaking in low tones to the frightened creature. With the heifer secured, he looked up at her through the driving rain. Could use a hand getting her back up, he called. Katherine dismounted, securing her own rope to her saddle horn before making her way carefully down to join him. Together they guided the heifer up the slippery incline, their shoulders occasionally brushing as they maneuvered through the mud. You've done this before, she observed as they reached level ground, the heifer rejoining the herd with apparent relief. Kyle smiled, wiping mud from his face with a soaked sleeve. Once or twice, though usually in better weather. For the first time since his arrival, Katherine felt the ghost of a smile tug at her lips. This is Montana. If you're waiting for better weather, you might be here a while. That wouldn't be the worst fate I can imagine, he replied, his gaze holding hers for a moment longer than necessary before he turned back to his horse. By midday they had successfully relocated the herd, repaired the damaged fence, and returned to the cabin, all 3 of them soaked to the skin despite their rain gear. Get changed, Thomas instructed as they stomped mud from their boots on the porch. Katherine, there's stew from yesterday we can heat up. Kyle hesitated. I should check on my horse first. I'll do it, Katherine found herself offering. You need to get dry before you catch your death. Both men looked at her with surprise, and she immediately regretted the unexpected kindness. Father needs help with the fire anyway, she added gruffly, turning toward the barn before either could respond. Inside the barn, she leaned against the door for a moment, confused by her own behavior. What was it about this stranger that had her acting so out of character? She prided herself on maintaining distance, on keeping her emotions firmly in check. Yet something about Kyle Daniels made her want to lower her guard, if only slightly. Foolishness, she muttered to herself, moving to check on Kyle's stallion as promised. The animal seemed comfortable enough, munching contentedly on hay despite the storm that still raged outside. When she returned to the cabin, she found Kyle had changed into clean but obviously well-worn clothes. He sat by the fire, helping her father prepare kindling for the stove. Your horse is fine, she reported, removing her sodden hat and hanging it by the door. Thank you, Kyle said simply. She nodded, retreating to her room to change into dry clothes. When she emerged, the men had a fire blazing in the stove and the leftover stew heating in a pot. The 3 ate in relative silence, the storm providing background noise as rain drummed against the roof and windows. Occasionally, Thomas would ask Kyle a question about his background or experience, and Katherine found herself listening with more interest than she cared to admit. Colorado, you said, Thomas inquired between spoonfuls of stew. Kyle nodded. Near Denver. My father's ranch was small but successful, raised me and my 3 brothers on it. And what brought you all the way to Montana? Katherine asked, unable to contain her curiosity. Something flickered in Kyle's eyes, a shadow of memory or emotion that was quickly masked. Change of fortune, he said vaguely. After my father passed, the ranch went to my oldest brother. There wasn't enough work for all of us, so I decided to see what opportunities might lie northward. Katherine sensed there was more to the story but didn't press. Everyone on the frontier carried secrets, some were best left undisturbed. Well, you proved your worth today, Thomas said, setting his empty bowl aside. The job is yours for as long as you want it. Pay is $15 a month plus room and board. We can't offer much in the way of comforts, but the work is honest. That's more than fair, Kyle replied, genuine gratitude in his voice, and I appreciate the chance to prove myself. You can move your things into the bunkhouse tomorrow, Thomas continued. It's small, but it's got a stove and a proper bed. No sense in you sleeping in the barn with the weather turning like this. Katherine shot her father a surprised look. The bunkhouse was barely 50 yards from the main cabin, much closer than she was comfortable having a stranger sleep. That's very generous, Kyle said, noting Katherine's expression, but I'm happy in the barn until you're both sure about me. I understand caution, especially out here. Thomas opened his mouth to protest, but Kyle continued. I've slept in worse places, believe me. The barn is dry and warm enough. In time, if I've earned your trust, I'd be grateful for the bunkhouse. Katherine felt a reluctant pang of respect for his perception. He had read her concern and addressed it without making a scene or putting her father in an awkward position. As you wish, Thomas conceded, though the offer stands when you're ready. After dinner, Kyle insisted on helping with the dishes despite Katherine's protests that it wasn't necessary. They worked side by side in silence for several minutes before he spoke. I want to thank you, he said quietly so that Thomas, who had moved to his chair by the fire, couldn't hear. For what? She asked, surprised. For not trusting me, he replied with a slight smile. It means you're smart. Too many people out here trust too easily. Katherine paused in her work, studying him. That's an odd thing to be grateful for. Is it? I'd rather earn trust slowly than be given it freely and risk disappointing later. He handed her the last plate to dry. Besides, it gives me something to work toward. Before she could respond, he thanked them both for the meal and excused himself, heading back out into the rain toward the barn. Katherine watched through the window as his figure disappeared into the darkness, an unexpected feeling of confusion washing over her. Kyle Daniels didn't fit neatly into her understanding of the world, of men in particular. He seemed genuinely kind, yet there was an undercurrent of something else beneath his easy manner, a depth of experience that belied his youth. He's a good worker, her father commented from his chair. Katherine turned from the window. Yes, he is. And a decent man, I think. She shrugged, unwilling to commit to that assessment just yet. Time will tell. Thomas smiled knowingly but said nothing more, returning to the book in his lap. Katherine busied herself with mending a tear in one of her shirts, but her thoughts kept drifting to the barn, where their new hire was settling in for the night. It had been a long time since someone new had entered their lives, someone who seemed to understand the unspoken rules of frontier existence without needing them explained. Despite her reservations, Katherine found herself curious about what tomorrow would bring. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity as spring announced itself in earnest across the valley. The cattle required constant attention with calving season upon them, and there was endless work preparing fields for planting. Through it all, Kyle proved himself invaluable, working from dawn until well after dusk without complaint. Katherine found herself gradually adjusting to his presence, even coming to rely on his skills and judgment in matters of the ranch. He had a particular way with horses that impressed even her, and she had grown up around experienced horsemen. One evening, as they returned from checking on a newborn calf, Katherine found herself engaged in actual conversation with him, something beyond the necessary communication of daily tasks. My father says you have a talent with horses, she remarked as they rode side by side in the golden light of sunset. Said he's never seen the bay mare take to someone so quickly. Kyle smiled, adjusting his hat against the setting sun. Animals know when you respect them. They can sense fear and anger too. I just try to approach them honestly. Honestly, she echoed, curious despite herself. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. Without pretense. A horse knows when you're trying to trick it or force it. They respond better to straightforward intentions and consistent behavior. Much like people, Katherine observed. Exactly like people, he agreed, giving her a sidelong glance, though people are generally more complicated. They rode in silence for a moment before Katherine asked, Where did you learn about horses? Kyle's expression softened with memory. My grandfather, he was a cavalry officer before settling in Colorado, had a way with even the most difficult animals. He used to say that a horse can read your soul better than any preacher. Katherine smiled at that, surprising herself. Sounds like a wise man. He taught me most of what I know about horses, ranching, life in general, I suppose. Kyle paused, seeming to consider whether to continue. He died when I was 16. Bronk threw him, and he never woke up. I'm sorry, Katherine said, meaning it. She knew all too well how quickly death could snatch away the people you loved in this unforgiving country. It was quick, at least, Kyle said quietly. That's about the best you can hope for out here sometimes. The simple truth of his statement resonated with her own experience, creating an unexpected moment of connection between them. Katherine felt a familiar warning in her mind. This was precisely the kind of attachment she had sworn to avoid, but for once, she didn't immediately retreat behind her usual walls. As they approached the ranch, Thomas came out to meet them, his expression grave. What's wrong? Katherine asked immediately, recognizing the tension in her father's posture. Received word from town, he said, handing her a folded paper. Marshall brought it by while you were out. Katherine dismounted quickly, scanning the message. Her face paled slightly as she read. What is it? Kyle asked, remaining on his horse. She looked up at him, her expression guarded once more. Blackfoot raiding party hit the Peterson place yesterday, took their horses and burned the barn. No one was hurt, but Marshall says they're moving south. Toward us, Thomas added grimly. Kyle nodded, his expression serious. How many men does the marshal have? Not enough, Katherine replied. And they're spread thin with the new settlements up north. We should prepare, Kyle said, dismounting. Check the fences, move the cattle closer to the house, take inventory of ammunition. Thomas looked at him with approval. Already started on the inventory, could use help with the rest. I'll see to the herd, Katherine said, already turning her horse. Not alone, Kyle insisted. If there are raiders in the area, no one should be out there by themselves. She bristled at being told what to do, but her father nodded in agreement. He's right, Kat, take Kyle with you. Reluctantly, she waited while Kyle quickly watered his horse. As they rode out again toward the herd, she could feel the tension building in her shoulders. I've been handling myself out here since I was 16, she said after they had ridden a short distance. I don't need protection. Kyle glanced at her. I never suggested you did. But even the best rider can be overwhelmed by numbers. It's not about capability, it's about practicality. His reasonable tone only irritated her further. And I suppose you've had experience with Blackfoot raiders. Some, he admitted. In Wyoming territory, worked a ranch near the reservation boundary for a season. He paused, then added, lost 2 good men who thought they could handle a night guard shift alone. Found what was left of them the next morning. The blunt statement sobered Katherine immediately. Kyle wasn't posturing or trying to diminish her abilities. He was speaking from experience, just as she would have done. I apologize, she said stiffly. You're right, of course. Kyle seemed surprised by her apology. No need for that. I understand the need to prove yourself. I just don't want to see anyone hurt unnecessarily. They reached the herd and began the work of moving them closer to the ranch buildings, where they would be easier to defend if necessary. As they worked, Katherine found herself studying Kyle with new eyes, noting the efficient way he handled his horse and rope, the quiet confidence with which he directed the cattle. There was something about the way he carried himself that suggested he had seen more trouble than he let on, a watchfulness that went beyond ordinary caution. She wondered again what had really brought him to Montana, what he might be running from. But such questions weren't asked out here, where many came to escape their pasts and start anew. With the cattle secured, they returned to find Thomas had prepared the house for potential trouble. Shutters were closed and barred, extra ammunition laid out on the table, and water barrels filled in case they were confined to the house for a period of time. We'll need to take turns keeping watch tonight, Thomas said as they entered. I'll take first shift, Kyle second, Katherine third. Kyle nodded. I brought my rifle in from the barn, if that's all right. More than all right, Thomas replied. We can use every gun. Katherine moved to the window, peering through a gap in the shutters at the darkening landscape. We should be fine if we stay alert. The Petersons weren't prepared. We are. No one said what they were all thinking. That preparation was no guarantee of safety on the frontier. Plenty of well-prepared settlers had still lost everything to raiders, weather, or simple bad luck. As night fell, Katherine retired to her room to rest before her watch, but sleep eluded her. She could hear the low murmur of her father and Kyle talking in the main room, their voices occasionally punctuated by the crackle of the fire. Despite her earlier irritation, she found comfort in knowing Kyle was there. Another capable pair of hands could make all the difference if trouble came. When her father knocked softly to wake her for her shift, she was already dressed and ready. She found Kyle sitting by the window, rifle across his knees, gazing out into the moonlit yard. "Anything?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "Just coyotes and the usual night sounds. Your father's asleep." "Seemed tired." Katherine nodded, concerned about her father's increasing fatigue lately. At 58, he was still strong, but the years of frontier hardship had taken their toll. "You should get some rest," she told Kyle, taking up position at the other window. Instead of leaving, he remained seated. "I'm not particularly tired. Thought I might keep you company for a while if you don't mind." She should have objected, should have insisted he follow the schedule, but something stopped her. Perhaps it was the quiet sincerity in his voice, or simply the comfort of not facing the dark hours alone. "If you like," she said with feigned indifference, "but there's no need to exhaust yourself." Kyle smiled, seeing through her attempt at detachment. "I've never needed much sleep. My mother used to say I was part owl." Despite herself, Katherine smiled back. "My mother said the same about me. Used to find me awake at all hours, watching the stars through our cabin window back in Missouri." It was the first time she had mentioned her mother since Kyle's arrival, and the memory brought a brief pang of grief that she quickly suppressed. "You miss her," Kyle observed softly. Katherine stiffened, regretting the moment of openness. "Everyone loses people out here." "That doesn't make it easier." She turned her attention back to the window, unwilling to pursue the conversation further. Kyle seemed to understand, falling silent as they both watched the night outside. After several minutes, he spoke again. "I lost my mother too when I was 12. Fever took her in less than a week." Katherine glanced at him, surprised by the volunteered information. "I'm sorry," she said, using the same words he had offered her earlier. Kyle nodded, still looking out the window. "My father never really recovered, threw himself into the ranch work, barely spoke to us boys for months afterward." He paused. "I think that's why I understand your caution. Losing someone changes how you see the world, makes you hesitant to let anyone new matter too much." The simple accuracy of his assessment unsettled Katherine. He had articulated precisely the philosophy she had adopted after her mother and brother died, that emotional attachment was a vulnerability she couldn't afford. "It's not caution," she said after a moment. "It's practicality. Out here people come and go, they die or leave or change. Building your life around them is foolish." "Is it?" Kyle turned to face her. "What's the alternative?" "Never connecting with anyone, living alongside people but always apart from them." His questions struck uncomfortably close to home. Wasn't that exactly what she had been doing for years now? "It's safer," she said finally. "Safer isn't always better." Kyle's voice was gentle, not challenging. "Sometimes the things that hurt us most are also the things that make life worth living." Katherine had no ready response to that. She had built her entire worldview around the principle that emotional self-sufficiency was the only reliable protection against the pain of loss. The idea that connection might be worth the inevitable hurt was foreign to her practiced stoicism. Before she could formulate a reply, a sound from outside drew both their attention, the distinctive snort of a horse, too close to the house to be their own animals in the corral. Kyle was on his feet in an instant, rifle raised. Katherine mirrored his movement, peering into the darkness beyond the window. "Wake your father," Kyle whispered. "Someone's out there." Heart-pounding, Katherine moved quietly to her father's door, rousing him with a hand over his mouth to keep him from making noise. Within seconds, Thomas was up and armed, joining them at the windows. "How many?" he asked in a hushed voice. "Can't tell yet," Kyle replied. "At least one horse, maybe more." They waited in tense silence, straining to hear any further sounds from the darkness. After what seemed an eternity, a voice called out in broken English, "Hello, the house. We come to talk, not fight." Thomas and Katherine exchanged looks of surprise. Raiders didn't typically announce themselves or seek conversation. Could be a trick, Kyle cautioned. Get them to open the door, then rush in. Thomas nodded his agreement. Who's there? He called back, keeping his position away from the window. Benjamin Little Horse and 2 braves from Blackfoot Camp, came the reply. We track raiders who steal from our people too. Need to speak with rancher. Catherine's eyes widened in surprise. Benjamin Little Horse was known in the area, a Blackfoot subchief who had maintained relatively peaceful relations with the white settlers. If it was truly him outside, this was no raiding party. How do we know it's really Little Horse? Thomas called. There was a pause then. 2 winters passed. I trade you 3 horses for rifle and blankets. Your daughter have medicine that saved my youngest son from cough sickness. Thomas relaxed slightly, nodding to Katherine. It was true, she had shared their precious supply of medicines with Little Horse's family during a particularly harsh winter when illness had swept through both settler and native communities alike. I'm going to open the door, Thomas decided. Katherine, Kyle, keep your rifles ready, but don't shoot unless there's clear danger. Thomas moved cautiously to the door, unbarring it slowly and opening it just enough to peer out. After a moment he opened it fully, revealing 3 mounted Blackfoot warriors in the yard, their faces visible in the moonlight. Benjamin, Thomas acknowledged. It's late for a social call. The lead warrior, distinguished by the eagle feathers in his hair, dismounted smoothly. Bad men come, not our people, renegades from north. They steal from Blackfoot, then steal from white settlers, make trouble between us. As Thomas invited the men inside to talk, Katherine found herself standing shoulder to shoulder with Kyle, both still tense with weapons ready. His presence beside her felt unexpectedly reassuring, his calm steadiness a counterpoint to her own racing thoughts. The visit from Little Horse marked the beginning of an uneasy alliance. The renegade band that had attacked the Peterson place consisted of outcasts from several tribes, led by a warrior known as Broken Hand who had been banished from the Blackfoot for excessive violence and theft. They had been raiding both native camps and white settlements, deliberately stirring conflict between the 2 groups. For the next several days, the Dawson Ranch became a center of activity as Little Horse's warriors patrolled the boundaries of their land, watching for signs of the renegade band. Katherine found herself working even more closely with Kyle, reinforcing vulnerable points around the property while her father coordinated with Little Horse. One afternoon, as they repaired a section of fence far from the main house, Kyle paused in his work, wiping sweat from his brow. Your father mentioned you were the one who treated Little Horse's son, he said, watching her face with interest. He said you have knowledge of medicines. Katherine nodded, hammering another nail into the fence post. My mother taught me. She was skilled with herbs and remedies. I continued learning after she passed, trading for books and knowledge whenever possible. That's impressive, Kyle said with genuine admiration. Not many would take the time to learn such things out here, where survival takes precedence. Medicine is survival, she replied simply, out here more than anywhere. Kyle handed her another nail. Little Horse clearly respects you for it. I noticed how he spoke to you directly, not just to your father. The Blackfoot value practical skills. Gender matters less than what you can contribute. She paused, setting down her hammer. My mother believed that too. She always said a frontier woman needed to be twice as capable as any man, because no one would make allowances for her being female. Wise woman, Kyle commented. Though I imagine that applies to anyone who's judged before they're known. Katherine glanced at him curiously. You speak as though you've experienced that yourself. Something flickered in his eyes, the same shadow she had glimpsed before when he spoke of leaving Colorado. Perhaps we all carry judgments from our past, don't we? Before she could probe further, a distant shout drew their attention. One of Little Horse's scouts was riding hard toward them, his arm raised in urgent signal. Trouble, Kyle said, already gathering their tools. We need to get back to the house. They mounted quickly, riding toward the ranch at a gallop. As they approached, they could see Thomas and Little Horse standing on the porch, deep in conversation. Raiders spotted, Thomas called as they dismounted. 10 miles north, heading this way. Little Horse's men count at least 15 riders. Katherine's stomach tightened with fear. 15 armed men against their meager defenses would be nearly impossible odds. How long do we have? Kyle asked, his voice steady despite the gravity of the news. Hours, not days, Little Horse answered. They camp now, we'll move at dawn. We need to evacuate, Thomas said firmly. Take what we can carry and head for town. Katherine shook her head vehemently. And leave everything we've built, the cattle, our home. No, we stay and fight. 15 against 4, her father countered, including Little Horse in his count. Those aren't fighting odds, Katherine, those are dying odds. 5, Little Horse corrected. 2 more of my warriors come by nightfall, still not good numbers. Kyle had been silent, his expression thoughtful. What if we make the numbers seem better than they are, he suggested. Create the appearance of more defenders than we actually have. All eyes turned to him, and Katherine felt a flicker of hope at the confidence in his voice. What do you have in mind? Thomas asked. Kyle outlined his plan quickly, using scarecrows positioned at various points around the property, moving horses between corrals to suggest mounted men, lighting multiple fires to indicate a larger encampment, and focusing their actual defense on the most defensible positions. It won't fool them for long, he admitted, but it might make them hesitate long enough for the marshal to arrive with reinforcements. Little Horse, can one of your men ride to town with a message? The Blackfoot chief nodded. My fastest rider already gone, but town is far, help may not come in time. Then we work with what we have, Kyle said determinedly, and we prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. The next hours passed in a flurry of activity as they implemented Kyle's strategy. Katherine found herself working alongside him with single-minded focus, their earlier conversation forgotten in the face of imminent danger. As they positioned the last of the dummy figures at the edge of the property, she paused to catch her breath. You've done this before, she observed, not really a question, defended against raiders. Kyle nodded, his expression grim. Once, in Wyoming, it didn't end well for everyone, but more survived than would have otherwise. And you? She asked quietly. He met her gaze, something unreadable in his eyes. I survived, not everyone does out here. No, she agreed softly, they don't. A moment of understanding passed between them, the shared acknowledgement that they were both products of frontier hardship, shaped by losses and hard choices that people in safer places would never comprehend. As twilight approached, they gathered in the cabin for a meal that might be their last together. The atmosphere was tense but determined, each person aware of what morning might bring. I want to thank you all, Thomas said as they ate, for standing with us. This isn't your fight, yet here you are. Little Horse nodded solemnly. Your enemies are our enemies. Broken Hand brings shame to all native people with his actions. Kyle said nothing for a moment, then spoke quietly. Sometimes a fight chooses you, not the other way around. All we can do is face it with courage and hope we're still standing when it's over. Katherine studied him across the table, seeing again the depth of experience that belied his youthful appearance. In the weeks since his arrival, Kyle Daniels had gradually transformed in her perception from potential threat to valued ally. Now, facing what might be their last night alive, she found herself grateful for his presence in ways she hadn't anticipated. As they finished the meal, Thomas outlined the watch schedule for the night. Little Horse and I will take first watch. Kyle, you and Katherine second. If his other warriors arrive, we'll adjust accordingly. Little Horse rose to his feet. I go now to meet my men on the trail. We'll return before moonrise. After he departed, Thomas turned to Kyle and Katherine. You two should get some rest while you can. Tomorrow we'll demand everything we have. Katherine nodded, retreating to her room, though she knew sleep would be elusive. She lay on her bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through possibilities for the coming day. What if the raiders overwhelmed their defenses? What if her father or Kyle were injured or killed? What if this home, built with years of sweat and sacrifice, was reduced to ashes like the Peterson place? A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Katherine, Kyle's voice called quietly. May I speak with you for a moment? She hesitated, then rose to open the door. Kyle stood in the hallway, looking solemn in the dim lamplight. I wanted to give you this, he said, holding out a small object. For safekeeping. Katherine took it, recognizing it as a small leather pouch on a cord. What is it? Open it, he suggested. Inside was a simple gold ring, worn smooth with age. It was my mother's, Kyle explained. The only thing of value I've kept all these years. If something happens to me tomorrow, I'd like you to have it." Katherine looked up at him, startled. "Nothing will happen to you." A sad smile touched his lips. "We both know better than to make such promises out here." He gently closed her fingers around the pouch. "Just keep it safe for now. Return it to me after if we're both still standing." The simple act, entrusting her with his most precious possession, touched Katherine deeply. It was a gesture of trust that went beyond their working relationship or tentative friendship. "I will," she promised quietly, understanding the significance of what he was asking. In a land where death could come swiftly and without warning, such gestures were as close to farewell as many ever got. Kyle nodded, his eyes holding hers for a long moment. "Try to rest," he said finally, turning to leave. "Kyle," she called softly after him. He paused, looking back. "Be careful tomorrow." His smile was genuine this time. "Always am, Katherine, always am." As he disappeared down the hallway, Katherine closed her door, clutching the leather pouch in her hand. The weight of it seemed disproportionate to its size, heavy with meaning and unspoken emotions. For the first time in years, she felt the protective walls around her heart beginning to crumble, worn down by the steady presence of a man who seemed to understand her without demanding that she change. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once, and possibly futile, given what morning might bring. She tucked the pouch safely into her inside pocket, close to her heart, and laid back down to wait for sleep that would not come. Dawn broke with ominous stillness across the valley. No birds sang, no breeze stirred the new grass. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for the violence to come. Katherine stood on the porch beside Kyle, both armed and ready, scanning the northern horizon where the raiders would appear. Little Horse's additional warriors had arrived during the night, bringing their total defense force to 7, still hopelessly outnumbered, but better than they had originally thought. "There," Kyle said quietly, pointing to a distant ridge where dark figures had appeared against the lightening sky. "They're coming." Thomas joined them, his weathered face set in grim lines. "Remember the plan. Make them think we're stronger than we are. Drive them toward the bottleneck at the creek where we can pick them off more easily." Katherine nodded, trying to ignore the fear that gnawed at her stomach. She had been in dangerous situations before, but never quite like this, never facing deliberate human malice on such a scale. "Katherine," her father said, his voice softening. "If things go badly, I want you to take the escape route we discussed. Get to town, no matter what happens here." She shook her head firmly. "I'm not leaving you. Either we all survive this or none of us do." "Kat." "No, father," she interrupted. "This is my home too, my fight as much as yours." Thomas looked as though he might argue further, but Kyle placed a hand on his shoulder. "She's right, we stand together or not at all." A shout from Little Horse, positioned at the eastern edge of the property, drew their attention. The raiders were picking up speed, breaking into a gallop across the open ground toward the ranch. "Positions," Thomas ordered. "And may God help us all." Katherine moved quickly to her assigned spot, the hayloft of the barn, where her elevated position would give her a clear line of fire toward the main approach. Kyle took position behind a stack of hay bales near the corral, while Thomas and Little Horse's warriors spread out to cover the remaining approaches. From her vantage point, Katherine could see the raiders clearly now, a motley collection of renegades, their faces painted for war, weapons gleaming in the morning light. At their head rode a massive man with a visibly deformed left hand, broken hand himself, she presumed. The first shots rang out as the raiders approached the outer perimeter where they had positioned the scarecrow figures. For a moment the deception worked. The attackers hesitated, apparently believing they were facing gunfire from multiple directions. Katherine held her breath, waiting for the right moment. Kyle had insisted they conserve ammunition, firing only when they had clear shots. The future of the ranch might depend on their discipline now. When the raiders realized some of their opponents were merely dummies, they let out war cries and charged forward with renewed confidence. Katherine sighted down her rifle at the nearest attacker, steadied her breathing as her father had taught her, and squeezed the trigger. The man tumbled from his horse, and chaos erupted across the property. Gunfire echoed from all directions as both defenders and attackers sought cover and exchanged shots. From her position, Katherine could see Kyle moving with practiced efficiency between firing positions, each shot deliberate and precise. 2 more raiders fell to his marksmanship before the attackers realized the danger and focused their attention on the corral area. "Kyle," she shouted in warning as 3 riders circled toward his position. He acknowledged with a raised hand, already moving to better cover. For what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes, the battle raged across the ranch yard. The defenders' superior positions and disciplined fire took a toll on the attackers, but the raiders' superior numbers began to tell. One of Little Horse's warriors fell with a cry, then another was wounded. Katherine continued firing, reloading, firing again, her shoulder aching from the rifle's recoil. Below her, the barn door splintered as raiders attempted to force entry. She shifted position, firing down through the hayloft opening at the men below, forcing them back temporarily. A sudden cry from outside drew her attention. Through the barn window, she could see her father staggering, blood spreading across his shirt from a wound in his side. Kyle was already racing toward him, firing as he ran to cover Thomas's retreat toward the house. Heart in her throat, Katherine swung her rifle toward the raiders pursuing her father, dropping one with a clean shot through the shoulder. Kyle reached Thomas, half carrying him toward the relative safety of the cabin as Katherine provided covering fire. Once they were inside, Katherine knew she needed to reach them. The barn was becoming untenable as more raiders surrounded it. She waited for a lull in the firing, then slipped down the ladder from the hayloft, making her way to the rear door of the barn. Outside, the morning air was thick with gunsmoke and the metallic scent of blood. Katherine crouched low, sprinting from the barn toward the house, expecting at any moment to feel the impact of a bullet in her back. She was halfway there when a mounted raider appeared suddenly around the corner of the chicken coop, cutting off her path. The man grinned savagely, raising his rifle toward her. A shot rang out, but not from the raider's gun. The man's expression shifted to surprise as he toppled sideways off his horse, revealing Kyle standing in the doorway of the cabin, his smoking rifle still raised. "Run," he shouted to her. Katherine didn't need to be told twice. She covered the remaining distance at a sprint, Kyle pulling her inside and slamming the door behind her. "Father," she gasped, trying to catch her breath. "I'm here," Thomas called weakly from the table where he lay. "Not as bad as it looks." Katherine rushed to his side, examining the wound with practiced hands. "Bullet went through clean," she assessed, relieved. "But you're losing blood." Kyle was moving around the cabin, checking windows and securing the door. "They're regrouping," he reported grimly. "Looks like they lost about a third of their men, but that still leaves 10 or so. And they're angry now." Katherine tore strips from a clean towel, working quickly to bandage her father's wound. "What about Little Horse and his men?" "2 down that I saw," Kyle replied. "The others have taken position in the tree line. They're still fighting." Thomas gripped Katherine's wrist. "The marshal should be on his way by now. We just need to hold out a little longer." Kyle moved to Katherine's side, helping her lift Thomas onto the bed in the corner of the main room. "We can defend the cabin," he said with quiet confidence. "It's solid and we have good lines of sight. If they want to take us, they'll pay dearly for it." As if in response to his words, a voice called out from outside, deep, accented, and filled with malice. "You inside, this is Broken Hand. Send out the woman and the rest may live." Kyle and Katherine exchanged shocked glances. "What the hell does he want with you?" Kyle demanded in a harsh whisper. Katherine shook her head, bewildered. "I have no idea." Thomas struggled to sit up. "The medicine," he said. "Little Horse's son, word must have spread that Katherine has healing knowledge. Raiders often take healers captive to tend their wounded." "Not happening," Kyle stated flatly, moving to the window. He called back to the raider leader, "No one's coming out. You want us, you'll have to come get us." A harsh laugh answered him. "Then you die slowly, we burn you out." Katherine's blood ran cold at the threat. The cabin, though sturdy, was primarily wood. Fire would be devastating. "We need to stop them before they can start a blaze," she said urgently. "Once it catches, we won't stand a chance." Kyle nodded grimly, checking his ammunition. "I'll go out the back, try to circle around and pick them off as they approach with torches." "No," Katherine grabbed his arm. "That's suicide." His eyes met hers, intense and determined. "You have a better idea." Before she could respond, a new sound reached them, horses, many of them, approaching fast from the east. For a moment, Katherine feared it was reinforcements for the raiders, but then came the unmistakable call of a bugle. The cavalry, Thomas breathed, relief evident in his voice. The marshal must have reached the fort. Outside, confusion erupted among the raiders. Shouts in multiple languages mingled with the thunder of approaching hoofbeats. Gunfire erupted again, but this time it was the attackers who were caught in the open. Kyle risked a glance out the window. Soldiers, he confirmed, a grin breaking across his face, at least 20 of them. And the marshal too, by the look of it. The battle was over quickly after that. Caught between the defenders in the ranch buildings and the arriving cavalry, the raiders were swiftly overwhelmed. Some surrendered, others fled, pursued by mounted soldiers. Broken Hand himself was among those captured. His reign of terror across the territory finally ended. As the soldiers secured the property, Katherine tended to her father and the wounded Blackfoot warriors. Kyle worked alongside the cavalry, helping to round up stray horses and secure prisoners. When a young lieutenant entered the cabin to check on them, he looked with surprise at Katherine as she expertly stitched a warrior's wound. "Ma'am," he said, removing his hat, "the marshal said to tell you they received your message in time thanks to the Blackfoot rider. The fort dispatched us immediately." Thomas managed a weak smile from his bed. "Seems we have much to thank Little Horse for." The lieutenant nodded. "The chief is outside, speaking with the captain. He lost one man, but the others will recover." He paused, looking around the cabin. "You folks put up one hell of a fight." "The captain says he hasn't seen defenses this effective against superior numbers in quite some time." Katherine glanced out the window, searching for Kyle among the men outside. She spotted him talking with the marshal, his posture relaxed for the first time since the raiders had appeared. "We had help," she said simply. After the lieutenant departed, she finished tending the wounded warrior, then moved to check on her father. The bleeding had slowed and his color was better than before. "You should rest," she told him, adjusting his bandages. Thomas caught her hand. "I saw how you looked at him," he said quietly. "Kyle." Katherine stiffened. "I don't know what you mean." Her father smiled knowingly. "You're just like your mother, she couldn't lie worth a damn either." He squeezed her fingers gently. "It's all right to care about him, you know. The world doesn't end when you let someone in." Before she could formulate a response, the door opened and Kyle entered, his face streaked with dirt and gunpowder but his eyes bright with the aftermath of survival. "Marshal says the territory's been after Broken Hand for months," he reported. "There's a substantial reward for information leading to his capture. He's splitting it between us and Little Horse's people." Thomas nodded approvingly. "Good man, the marshal." Kyle's eyes found Katherine's, holding them for a long moment. "Everything all right in here?" "As well as can be expected," she replied, suddenly aware of her father watching them with interest. "Father's stable, the warrior will recover." Kyle moved closer, lowering his voice. "And you, are you all right?" The simple question, focused on her well-being rather than her capabilities or usefulness, caught Katherine off guard. When had someone last asked how she was rather than what she could do? "I'm fine," she said automatically, then reconsidered. "Actually, I'm exhausted and relieved and—" "Alive," Kyle finished for her, a small smile touching his lips. "Sometimes that's enough for one day." The truth of his statement resonated within her. They had survived, not unscathed, but alive and together. In the harsh reality of frontier life, that was indeed sometimes enough. "The leather pouch," she remembered suddenly, reaching into her pocket. "I should return this to you." Kyle shook his head. "Keep it safe a little longer, there's still work to be done." He glanced at Thomas. "Your father needs rest, and there are repairs to be made before nightfall." For the next several days, the Dawson Ranch was a center of activity as soldiers helped with repairs, the marshal took statements, and the wounded recovered. Kyle worked tirelessly alongside the soldiers, directing repairs to damaged buildings and fences with the ease of someone accustomed to command. Katherine divided her time between caring for her father and the wounded Blackfoot warriors and helping with the restoration of their home. She found herself frequently working alongside Kyle, their partnership strengthened by the shared experience of battle. One evening, as they repaired the damaged barn door together, Katherine finally asked the question that had been on her mind since the attack. "You've seen combat before, haven't you? Not just raiders, but real warfare." Kyle paused in his hammering, studying the nail in his hand for a long moment before answering. Yes, I served with the Union Army, 2nd Colorado Cavalry. He glanced at her. That's where I learned most of the defensive tactics we used. Understanding dawned, that's why you left Colorado, the war changed things for you. He nodded slowly. When I came home, everything was different. Or maybe I was the one who had changed. Either way, I couldn't stay. What happened? She asked gently. Kyle set down his hammer, leaning against the barn wall. I saw things during the war, did things that I'm not proud of. When it was over, I thought I could go back to being the person I was before. He shook his head. But that person was gone. My family could see it, even if they didn't say so. I became a stranger in my own home. The raw honesty in his voice touched something deep within Katherine. She recognized in his words echoes of her own experience, the way loss and hardship had transformed her from the carefree girl she had once been into the guarded woman she now was. I understand, she said quietly. After my mother and brother died, I changed too. Father says I built walls around myself that no one could climb. Kyle looked at her, a hint of a smile touching his lips. Pretty high walls at that. Were they, she asked, surprising herself with the question, or did you just know how to get past them? His eyes held hers, something warm and unexpected passing between them. I recognized them, he said simply, because they looked a lot like my own. In that moment, Katherine felt a shift in her perception of Kyle and of herself. Their shared experiences, though different in detail, had shaped them in similar ways. Both had learned to protect themselves from further pain by keeping others at a distance. Both had discovered that survival sometimes came at the cost of connection. Maybe, she said hesitantly, we've both been hiding behind those walls for too long. Kyle's expression softened. Maybe we have. Before either could say more, one of the soldiers called Kyle's name, needing assistance with a repair on the roof. The moment passed, but something had changed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. That night, after dinner with her father and several of the remaining soldiers, Katherine found herself unable to sleep. The events of the past days kept replaying in her mind, the terror of the attack, the relief of survival, and most persistently, the conversation with Kyle in the barn. She rose from her bed and moved to the window, gazing out at the moonlit yard. The soldiers had set up camp near the corral, their fire burning low now as most slept. A solitary figure sat apart from the others, silhouetted against the dying flames. Even at a distance, she recognized Kyle's posture, shoulders straight but relaxed, head tilted slightly as he stared into the fire. Without consciously deciding to do so, Katherine found herself pulling on her boots and shawl and slipping quietly out of the cabin. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. She approached the fire slowly, not wanting to startle Kyle from his thoughts. Couldn't sleep, he asked without turning, somehow aware of her presence. Too much on my mind, she admitted, settling beside him on the log he was using as a seat. Kyle nodded, poking at the embers with a stick. Same here. They sat in comfortable silence for a time, watching the play of firelight against darkness. Finally, Kyle spoke again. The marshal offered me a job today, deputy position in Helena. Said they could use a man with military experience and frontier skills. Katherine felt a sudden tightness in her chest. Are you going to take it? I told him I needed to think about it. Kyle glanced at her. I've grown fond of this place and the people here. The implication in his words hung between them, heavy with possibility. We've grown fond of you too, she said carefully. You've proven yourself a valuable hand. Kyle's smile held a touch of sadness. Is that all I am, Katherine? A valuable hand. The directness of his question caught her off guard. In the weeks since his arrival, Kyle had become far more than a hired worker. He had become a friend, a confidant, and perhaps something more that she had been unwilling to acknowledge even to herself. No, she admitted finally, that's not all you are. He turned to face her fully, the firelight casting his features in warm light and deep shadow. What am I to you then? Katherine felt the walls around her heart trembling, threatening to collapse entirely. The practiced caution of years warred with the undeniable truth that this man had somehow become important to her, dangerously important. I don't know, she whispered, the words barely audible above the crackling fire. And that terrifies me. Kyle reached for her hand, his fingers warm against her skin. Why does it terrify you? Because everyone I've ever cared about has been taken from me, she confessed, the truth spilling out despite her best efforts to contain it. My mother, my brother, I nearly lost my father in the raid. Out here, caring for people is just setting yourself up for heartbreak. Or for joy, Kyle countered gently. Yes, we lose people on the frontier. But that's precisely why connections matter more out here, not less. What's the point of surviving if we're alone? His words echoed her father's sentiment from days before, challenging the philosophy she had lived by for years. What good were walls of protection if they left you isolated within them? I don't know how to do this, she admitted. I've spent so long keeping people at arm's length. Kyle's hand tightened around hers. So have I. Maybe we can figure it out together. The simple offer, not a demand or even a declaration, just the possibility of companionship in navigating uncertain emotional territory, touched Katherine deeply. This was not the aggressive pursuit she had rebuffed from other men in the past, but something far more considerate. Kyle understood her caution because he shared it. I'd like that, she said softly. He smiled, relief evident in his expression. So would I. They sat together by the dying fire, hands still joined, as the night deepened around them. No further words were needed. The simple acknowledgement of mutual feeling was enough for now. When Katherine finally returned to her room, she carried with her a sense of possibility that had been absent from her life for too long. The walls around her heart hadn't fallen completely, but perhaps they had developed a door, one she might someday be brave enough to open fully. The cavalry departed 2 days later, taking the captured raiders to face justice in Helena. Little Horse and his remaining warriors returned to their camp with promises of continued friendship and the marshal's assurance that their assistance would be officially recognized by the territorial government. As life at the ranch gradually returned to normal, Katherine found herself watching Kyle with new awareness. He continued his duties with the same quiet competence as before, but there was a lightness to his interactions with her now, a careful testing of boundaries that had previously seemed immovable. Thomas, recovering well from his wound, observed their changing dynamic with poorly concealed approval. That young man plans to stay, he commented one evening as Katherine prepared dinner. Marshall told me he turned down the deputy position. She kept her expression neutral despite the leap of her heart. Did he? That's good for us, I suppose. Good hands are hard to find. Her father's knowing chuckle made her cheeks warm. Yes, quite a hand he is. Especially good at getting my stubborn daughter to smile again. Father, she protested, but without real irritation. Thomas became more serious. Your mother would have liked him, you know. She always said you'd need someone as strong as you are, but with a gentle heart. The mention of her mother in connection with Kyle felt strangely right. Amelia Dawson had been a remarkable woman, resilient yet compassionate, practical yet capable of deep feeling. Perhaps there was something of her wisdom in Katherine's growing attachment to Kyle. I think she would have liked him too, she admitted softly. Later that evening, as Katherine sat on the porch mending a shirt torn during the recent repairs, Kyle joined her, settling into the chair beside hers. They had taken to spending these quiet twilight hours together, sometimes talking, sometimes simply enjoying each other's company in companionable silence. Your father seems much improved, Kyle observed, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in pink and gold. He's always been a quick healer, Katherine replied, though he's not as young as he once was. This recovery is taking more out of him than he wants to admit. Kyle nodded thoughtfully. He mentioned wanting to expand the herd next spring. That's ambitious for just the three of us. The casual inclusion of himself in their future plans did not escape Katherine's notice. So you're planning to stay through winter then? I was thinking longer than that, he said carefully. If you and your father are amenable. Katherine set her mending aside, turning to face him directly. Why did you turn down the marshal's offer? Kyle met her gaze steadily. I think you know why. I'd like to hear you say it, she insisted gently. He smiled, a hint of vulnerability in his expression. Because in all my wandering since the war, this is the first place that's felt like somewhere I might belong. And because you're here. The simple honesty of his answer touched her deeply. There was no pretense in Kyle Daniels, no attempt to impress or manipulate, just the straightforward truth that she had become important enough to influence his choices. "I'm glad you stayed," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Kyle reached into his pocket, extracting a small object. "I believe you still have something of mine." Katherine nodded, reaching for the leather pouch she had carried close to her heart since the night before the raid. She handed it to him, feeling oddly reluctant to part with it. To her surprise, Kyle opened the pouch and removed the gold ring, holding it up in the fading light. "My mother wore this for 30 years, he said. "Through good times and hard ones, she used to say it wasn't the gold that made it valuable, but what it represented, a promise kept through all life's challenges." Katherine's heart began to beat faster as she realized the significance of the moment. "Kyle, I'm not asking for any promises yet," he assured her quickly. "I know we're still learning each other, but I want you to keep this safe for me a while longer." He placed the ring in her palm, closing her fingers gently around it. "Consider it a token of possibility, of what might be when we're both ready." The gesture, neither a formal proposal nor a casual gift, but something in between, perfectly captured their current relationship. Moving beyond friendship but not rushing headlong into commitment before either was prepared. "I'll keep it safe," she promised, slipping the ring back into its pouch. Kyle smiled, satisfied. "That's all I ask for now." As summer faded into autumn, life at the Dawson Ranch settled into a pleasant rhythm. The cattle thrived, repairs to the raid damage were completed, and preparations for winter became the primary focus. Through it all, the bond between Katherine and Kyle deepened gradually, neither rushing the natural evolution of their feelings. They began riding together in the evenings, exploring the boundaries of the ranch and sometimes venturing beyond into the stunning Montana wilderness. During these rides, they shared stories of their pasts, Kyle speaking of his experiences during the war and Katherine revealing more about her mother and brother, memories she had kept locked away for years. On one such ride in late September, they discovered a small hidden valley nestled between two ridges, where a clear spring fed a meadow of late-blooming wildflowers. They dismounted to rest the horses, walking slowly through the knee-high grass. "It's beautiful," Katherine said, stooping to examine a cluster of purple asters. "I can't believe I never knew this was here, so close to home." Kyle watched her with a smile. "Sometimes the best things are right under our noses, just waiting to be discovered." She caught his meaning and returned his smile, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. In the past months, Katherine had discovered a capacity for joy she had thought lost forever, and the courage to embrace it despite the risks. "My father thinks you're going to propose to me," she said suddenly, surprising herself with her directness. Kyle raised an eyebrow, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Does he now?" "And what do you think?" Katherine plucked one of the asters, twirling it between her fingers. "I think that I wouldn't say no if you did." The admission, the first clear acknowledgement of her feelings, hung in the air between them. Kyle stepped closer, taking the flower from her hand and tucking it gently behind her ear. "Katherine Dawson," he said softly, "I've known from the moment I rode onto your ranch that you were someone special. Not because you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, though you are, but because you have a strength and honesty that's rare in this world." She looked up at him, heart pounding. "I'm not pretty," she whispered, suddenly vulnerable. "Not like the ladies in town with their fancy dresses and perfect manners." Kyle's smile deepened as he cradled her face in his hands. "That's fine," he replied gently. "I need honest, not fancy. And you, Katherine, are the most honestly beautiful person I've ever known, inside and out." Before she could respond, he leaned down and kissed her softly. It was a tentative kiss at first, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Katherine found herself responding with a certainty that surprised her, her hands reaching up to rest on his shoulders as the kiss deepened. When they finally parted, she was breathless and smiling. "I think," she said slowly, "that my father might be right after all." Kyle laughed, the sound echoing joyfully across the hidden valley. "He's a wise man, but I won't be rushed even by him. When I ask you properly, I want it to be because we're both absolutely ready." He took her hand, interlacing their fingers. "Some things are worth waiting for." They returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, riding side by side in comfortable silence. Thomas, sitting on the porch with his pipe, observed their approach with a knowing smile but said nothing beyond a casual greeting. That night, as Katherine prepared for bed, she removed the leather pouch from its hiding place and opened it, examining the simple gold ring in the lamplight. It represented not just Kyle's feelings for her, but a possible future she had long since stopped believing in, one where love and companionship existed alongside the harsh realities of frontier life, perhaps even making those realities more bearable. She replaced the ring carefully, touched by its history and meaning. Kyle was right, some things were worth waiting for, worth the risk of eventual pain. Perhaps that was the lesson she had been slowly learning since his arrival. That walls built to prevent hurt could also prevent healing, growth, and joy. As autumn progressed and the first snows dusted the mountains, Katherine found herself looking forward to winter for the first time in years. Normally, the season represented isolation and hardship, but this year would be different. This year, the long evenings would mean more time with Kyle by the fire, more stories exchanged, more moments of connection. In mid-October, a letter arrived from Helena that changed everything. Thomas returned from town with the mail and a grave expression, handing the official-looking envelope to Kyle. "It's addressed to you," he said, "from the territorial governor's office." Kyle opened it with a puzzled frown that deepened as he read the contents. Katherine watched his face, her stomach tightening at the obvious distress in his expression. "What is it?" she asked when he finally looked up. "The governor is forming a special ranger unit to patrol the territory's borders and protect isolated settlements," Kyle explained, his voice strangely distant. "The marshal recommended me for a lieutenant's position. They want me in Helena by the 1st of November. Katherine felt as though the ground had suddenly shifted beneath her feet. "That's less than 2 weeks away." Kyle nodded, folding the letter carefully. "Yes." "Are you going to accept?" Thomas asked, watching them both closely. "I don't know," Kyle admitted. "It's an important position. The kind of work that could make a real difference to folks out here." The unspoken question hung heavy in the air. Would he choose duty over the life he was building with them, over Katherine? "You should consider it carefully," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Such opportunities don't come along often." Without waiting for his response, she turned and walked quickly out of the cabin, needing space to process the unexpected development. She made it as far as the barn before the tears she had been fighting spilled over. Kyle found her there a short time later, sitting on a hay bale, angrily wiping at her damp cheeks. "Katherine," he said softly, approaching cautiously. "Don't," she warned, raising a hand to stop him. "Don't apologize for considering it. It's an honor to be selected." He sat beside her, respecting her space but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "I haven't decided anything yet." "But you're thinking about it," she said, not a question but a statement. "As you should, it's who you are, Kyle. You want to protect people, to make a difference." "Yes," he admitted, "but that doesn't mean I want to leave you." Katherine finally looked at him directly, her eyes still bright with unshed tears. "Then don't." The simple plea, so unlike her usual self-sufficient demeanor, revealed the depth of her feelings more clearly than any declaration could have. Kyle reached for her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. "What if there was another option, one where I wouldn't have to choose between duty and us?" She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "The letter mentioned that rangers typically patrol from a home base, somewhere they return to between assignments." He squeezed her hand gently. "This ranch could be that base if you and your father were willing." Hope flickered within her. "You'd still be gone for periods of time." "Yes, but I'd always come back. This would be home." He paused, gathering his courage. "Our home, if you'll have me." Katherine's breath caught as she realized what he was suggesting. "Kyle, are you?" He slid off the hay bale onto one knee before her, still holding her hand. "I was planning something more romantic," he said with a self-deprecating smile, "but life on the frontier rarely goes according to plan, does it?" From his pocket he produced a small wooden box, not the leather pouch she had been safeguarding, but something new. He opened it to reveal a delicate silver ring with a small, sparkling stone. "I had this made in town last week," he explained. "The stone is from my mother's ring. I took it when you were busy with the cattle drive. The silver is new, though. I wanted you to have something that honored the past but looked toward the future, our future." Katherine stared at the ring, then at Kyle's earnest face, her heart feeling too large for her chest. Katherine Dawson, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, I love you. I love your strength, your honesty, your fierce loyalty to those you care about. I want to build a life with you here if you'll have me as your husband. Will you marry me? The tears returned, but this time accompanied by a smile that transformed her entire face. Yes, she whispered, yes, I will. Kyle slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and gathered her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left no doubt about his feelings. When they finally broke apart, Katherine laughed softly. My father is going to be insufferably smug about this. Kyle grinned. He already knows. I asked his blessing last week. Of course you did, she said with mock exasperation. No wonder he's been smiling to himself lately. They returned to the cabin hand in hand, where Thomas was waiting with barely contained excitement and a bottle of good whiskey he'd apparently been saving for this very occasion. To the future, he toasted, raising his glass to the newly engaged couple. May it be long and happy. To the future, they echoed, glasses touching with a musical chime that seemed to echo the joy in Katherine's heart. Later, as they sat together on the porch watching stars appear in the darkening sky, Katherine leaned her head against Kyle's shoulder. I was wrong, you know, she said quietly. About what? About caring for people being a weakness out here. She twisted her new ring, still unfamiliar, on her finger. I thought building walls around my heart was the only way to survive the frontier, but you showed me there's another way, that we survive better together than alone. Kyle pressed a kiss to the top of her head. We're stronger together, he agreed. That's always been the truth of frontier life, even if some of us forget it sometimes. As they sat in companionable silence, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From her initial suspicion of the stranger who rode onto their ranch to the deep bond they now shared, everything had changed, including her. The walls she had built around her heart hadn't been torn down. Rather, they had been transformed into something new, a foundation, perhaps, for the life she and Kyle would build together, strong enough to withstand the hardships of frontier existence, but open enough to let in light and love and possibility. The wedding took place on the first day of December, with snow blanketing the valley and transforming the landscape into a pristine wonderland. Despite the weather, friends from town made the journey to witness the ceremony, along with Little Horse and several members of his tribe, who brought gifts of beautifully tanned hides and intricate beadwork. Katherine wore her mother's dress, carefully altered to fit her taller frame, with sprigs of pine and dried berries in her hair instead of flowers. As she stood before the traveling preacher with Kyle beside her, handsome in a new suit ordered specially from Helena, she felt a sense of rightness that transcended the day itself. This was not just a wedding, it was the beginning of a new chapter in the story of the Dawson Ranch, soon to be the Dawson Daniels Ranch, as Kyle had insisted on honoring her family name alongside his own. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, spoken clearly despite the emotion that made both their voices occasionally waver. When the preacher finally pronounced them husband and wife and Kyle kissed her with gentle reverence, the gathered crowd erupted in cheers that seemed to echo across the snow-covered valley. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing in the main house, which had been cleared of furniture for the occasion. Katherine found herself watching Kyle as he spoke with guests, laughing with Little Horse's warriors or discussing cattle prices with neighbors, completely at ease in this community that had so readily accepted him as one of their own. Thomas joined her observation, a contentment in his expression that had been absent for too long. Your mother would be proud, he said quietly, of the woman you've become and the man you've chosen. Katherine squeezed his hand. I feel her presence today. So do I, her father agreed, and your brothers too. Family never truly leaves us, even when they're gone from this world. The wisdom in his words struck her deeply. Perhaps that was the final lesson she had needed to learn, that love, once given, remained a part of you even through loss. The risk of pain was real, but it didn't diminish the value of the connection. Kyle approached them, extending his hand to Katherine. May I have this dance, Mrs. Daniels? She smiled, taking his hand. You may indeed, Mr. Daniels. As they moved together to the music, surrounded by friends and family in the warm, lantern-lit room, Katherine felt the last of her old fears melting away. The frontier would always be challenging, dangerous, unpredictable, sometimes cruel, but no longer would she face it alone. Happy? Kyle asked softly, his arms secure around her waist. Katherine nodded, meeting his gaze with absolute certainty. Happier than I ever thought possible. Good, he replied with a tender smile, because this is just the beginning. In the years that followed, the Dawson-Daniels ranch flourished under their combined stewardship. Kyle's position with the territorial rangers brought new connections and opportunities, while Katherine's skills as a healer became increasingly valued throughout the region. Thomas, relieved of many of the heavier responsibilities by his son-in-law's presence, found renewed energy to pursue the breeding program he had long envisioned for their cattle. The ranch's reputation for quality stock spread beyond Montana territory, bringing buyers from as far away as Chicago. Kyle's patrols with the Rangers took him away from home periodically, but never for longer than he had promised. Each homecoming was a celebration, and Katherine discovered that brief separations only strengthened their appreciation for the life they shared. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Katherine discovered she was expecting their first child. The news filled the ranch with joy and anticipation, especially for Thomas, who had begun to fear he might never become a grandfather. Their daughter, Amelia Rose, was born on a clear October morning, with golden aspen leaves drifting past the bedroom window. She had her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit, evident from her very first cry. As Katherine held her newborn daughter while Kyle sat beside them on the bed, his face awestruck with love and wonder, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. "I never imagined this," she admitted softly. "A family of my own. After everything we lost, I convinced myself that loving someone was too dangerous, too likely to end in heartbreak." Kyle kissed her forehead gently. "And now I understand what my father tried to tell me years ago, that love is worth the risk, that walls meant to protect can also imprison." She looked down at their daughter, sleeping peacefully in her arms. "That the family we choose can heal the wounds left by the family we've lost." "She's perfect," Kyle whispered, carefully tracing their daughter's tiny features with one finger. "She is," Katherine agreed, "and so is this life we've built together." She met his gaze, seeing in his eyes the same gratitude and wonder she felt. "Thank you for being patient enough to wait while I learned to trust again." "Some things," Kyle replied with a tender smile, echoing words he had spoken what seemed a lifetime ago, "are worth waiting for." Outside the window, Montana stretched in all its wild, magnificent beauty, still harsh, still challenging, still demanding courage from those who chose to make it their home. But within the walls of the ranch house, something equally powerful had taken root and flourished. A love strong enough to withstand whatever the frontier might bring, honest enough to face life's hardships together, and deep enough to pass on to the next generation. As the autumn sun cast long shadows across the valley that had witnessed their journey from strangers to family, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that she had found what she had never thought to seek, not just survival on the frontier, but a life filled with purpose, connection, and abiding love. It was more than enough, it was everything.